Let's move on then. Let's talk about the infra sector now. With the union budget due next week, what are the key expectations from this space? To discuss this, we are joined by Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, founder and managing trustee of Infravision Foundation, as well as Mr. Padmanabhan, the senior director of CRISIL Market Intelligence, as well as analytics. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, for joining in, and good morning and welcome to the show. Well, let's start with you, Mr. Chatterjee. You're calling for a bigger boost in terms of spend. Could you give us a couple of numbers out there? And do you think the government has enough of fiscal headroom to go ahead and push the accelerator here?
So let's talk about the headline numbers. If you have when you track the last few years, you would have seen that year on year, the outlays have increased by 25 or 30%. And that has been the primer of the economy and GDP growth in a situation where, as we all know, private Capex has not been up to expectations. That trend is continuing, and the maths is very clear. For example, a very senior functionary in the finance ministry during the post-budget interactions last year shared in a media interaction that they have a confidential internal report in the Ministry of Finance that a rupee spent on public expenditure on infra and public works results in 3 rupees of GDP, whereas 1 rupee spent on measures like direct benefit transfers, DBT, results in 90 paisa of GDP growth. So the maths is very clear that if you have to constantly keep priming the economy with public outlays, which is the case here, then you need to keep investing in infra at the same pace, which means a 30% increase. Now, the last full year budget was 10 lakh crores. I am discounting the interim budget at 11.1, which I thought was just a holding operation. But if you take the last full year budget at 10 lakh crores and you put a 30% increase on that, my personal expectation is that we are likely to see a 13 lakh crore budget from the union government. And the thumb rule there again is that if the union government spends X, then an equal amount is spent by 3 other constituents, which is private sector, extra budgetary resources, and states. So you're likely to get a 26 lakh crore total infra spend in the economy. And the maths, I mean, I'm not delving into detailed maths now, but the maths is very clear. And that is going to keep priming the GDP at expected levels of 7.5 and 8% growth. Now, if you reduce the infra outlay from 30% to say 10 or 15 or 20, then you have to be mentally prepared that you're not going to get a GDP revving up at 7.5 and 8. You're going to see a drop in GDP. So the broad number, in conclusion to your question, is that my expectation is that with the need to keep employment going, to keep the GDP primed to get 8% growth, the minimum expectation is that the government will have a 13 lakh crore outlay, 10% over the last full year. Over to you. 30% over the last full year. Sorry.
Right. Good morning, Prashant here. Sorry, Mr. Chatterjee, just to, you said you put out a number of 26 lakh crores as well. What was that?
See, the thumb rule is that when the central government spends X, then 3 other constituents together spend an equal amount. So if the central government expenditure is a lead. So if the central government spends 13 lakh crores, another 13 lakh crores will be spent by the combination of states, extra budgetary resources, PSUs, and private sector. So 13 will be matched with 13. You will get a 26 lakh crore outlay for the total, infra spend in the economy, and that will keep priming the economy to an 8% growth.
In the interim budget, what was that? What was the sort of number? The 13 lakh crore that you.
1.
Sorry, 11.1.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Let me just welcome, Jagannarayan, Padmanabhan as well. Mr. Padmanabhan, good morning. Good to have you with us here.
Good morning.
So, as you heard, Mr. Chatterjee, of course, said that interim budget was a holding operation, and this is going to be a big one. And they have, things have changed, right? There's an RBI dividend and tax collections have been robust, etc. Well-known facts. First of all, do you think that is going to be the case? Because, if you look at the interim budget as well and look at specific sectors, that is FY25 budgetary, the BE number, railway Capex was projected to grow 2%. These are all interim numbers, 2%. Road was supposed to grow 3%. spend on roads, spend on defense 9%, housing and urban affairs 3%. So there was a sharp slowdown as compared to the last many years, 2022, 23, 24. So would you align with what Mr. Chatterjee is saying, that that was just an interim number and we'll get a much larger allocation now comparable to the last few years?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. I think from a context perspective, we are operating in a fairly larger base. So pump priming has been happening for the last 5-6 years in the infra space specifically. And I think just to cut that into multiple pieces would be important. So roads and railways garner close to about 50% and above in the overall infra spend. I think what Mr. Chatterjee also alluded to is that the previous year was 10 lakh crore, which moved into about 11.1 lakh crore. So that itself was in a way a moderation, and his expectation is that 30% growth. So the interim budget did have a pause in terms of the overall growth. Historically, there has been between 25 to 30% in the infra spend. Yes, we do expect a similar kind of a jump up in the spend, which will happen, and it will go primarily to these two sectors, which is roads and the railways. And we also see and the ability to absorb such huge capital is also there only with these sectors. So given that context, I think this is important. The other ministries that you mentioned, actually, the highest I think is about 50,000 crore tops, which will go into the capital expenditure. The revenue expenditure could be higher, but the capital expenditure is tops 50,000 crore in any of the other 5-7 infrastructure base which is there. Yeah, so hope that answers. Yeah.
Mr. Chatterjee, can we talk about sort of 2 or 3 schemes which you think will receive the maximum attention? Because I think markets will also be interested in understanding that. There was, of course, the entire water theme, which we've discussed with you before. Just 2 or 3 sort of flagship schemes or areas which you think will see the maximum attention. Yeah.
Well, let me speak about the number one policy intervention which the economy sorely needs. And I have been arguing this on your channel and other channels quite vigorously. We see that a product like cement, which is both an Aam Aadmi product as well as the key infrastructure intermediate, accounting for a large portion of the cost outlays, is taxed at 28% GST. The 28% is what is called the sin tax slab. It defies rationality why an infrastructure intermediate, as well as an Aam Aadmi product, a person who is converting his mud house to a cement concrete house, why should we continue with a 28% GST on cement when it itself is one of the primers in terms of cost? So while the budget itself is an arithmetical exercise, we all know that it is also a platform for announcing key thinking of the government and imminent policy changes. So my request to the FM and the Finance Ministry over the last 2-3 years, and now it gathers momentum because of the revenue buoyancy that we are seeing. The government can do it now. Their budget speech should make a reference to the fact that the government is conscious about reducing a 28% GST on cement down to about 12%, and that the reference should be that the matter should be taken up at the GST Council. It will have far-reaching ramifications on the economy, both in terms of leading to a boost in the consumption of cement and construction, as well as, since government is the largest spender in infrastructure, a reduction in cement will make its budgets move that much more forward. It can do far more in a given budget. So all trends point to an economic intervention on cement GST, which is crying for attention. Let me stop here because we can talk about many sectors: water, rail, road, irrigation, rural, urban. But let me stop here because I think this is an important point for all of us concerned with policy making in the budget.
Mr. Jagannarayan, specifically, what are you expecting for the 2 states? One is, Andhra Pradesh, and the other one is Bihar. Given the political compulsions and the way the election is panned out, there is talk about a special status being given, extra support given to these 2 particular states. What is your expectation? What might come out in the budget?
Sure. So before that, can I just add on to what Mr. Chatterjee
Yes.
talked about the schemes part of it, if you allow me? And I think which will be a very important one in the overall scheme of things is the roads which have been getting a fair share, which was driven by the Bharatmala Pariyojana scheme. And I think that was the question which was also asked. In the last 4 months, if you were to see, the awards has been really at a pause. It's been really muted. And the first 2 months, due to election, the next 2 months, the awards has really been very muted. I think a couple of 100 crores, 100 kilometers at best has been awarded in that. While the traction for in the same period should have been close to about 500 to 600 kilometers. And the primary reason is from the Bharatmala Pariyojana scheme has not got the cabinet approval as such today. So my sense is in the going forward, this will be a primary area where the government may make an announcement in the budget for a revamp and a higher allocation could go for this particular scheme, which will then be for a medium term at the next 5 years, which will be the phase 2 part of it. And specifically here, I think the capital expenditure, we are talking about lakh crores and all of that. The focus has to move towards from just build out into the services part of it. And when I say services, it is more towards the safety aspects which are there, either on the road part of it or on the rail. So I think a lot of focus which will happen, passenger amenities on the highways part of it, which would be there. On the railways, we could look at something on the Kavach and the security and the safety of the passengers part of it. So I think a lot of this from a medium-term outlook, because of what has got stopped before, could get announced in the budget specifically. And then enhanced Bharatmala Pariyojana scheme is what I'm expecting in the forthcoming budget. Specific to the two states, unfortunately, I don't track Bihar or Andhra Pradesh on a state level part of it, but suffice it to say, from an infra build out, the states, as Mr. Chatterjee also pointed out, have been matching similar to what has been done by the center. And I'm expecting similar thing to continue going forward at the state level as well. So the focus there would also be on the hard infrastructure build out. We could also look at the rural roads to be revamped, and because that's a significant job generation part of it, which will be the theme for the government. The food chain and the agro part of it is also something which needs to get augmented. So schemes on this nature, specific on the infra part of it, is what we could look at.
I think we barely scratched the surface, but gives us a sense to begin with, and maybe we'll have one more round of sort of a pre-budget chat with both of you. But interesting observations. Mr. Chatterjee and Mr. Padmanabhan, you might want to stay on. We're discussing housing on the other side as well. We've got a housing finance company to ask about expectations there again. I mean, that's more or less infra. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Thank you for joining us, and really appreciate your time on CNBC TV 18.